This is part 5, the anima and the divine feminine. So James makes his way to Rosewater Park and he's asking Mary, "Are you here?" Shortly after his interaction with Laura, James comes to the park entrance. And interestingly enough, rosewater, which represents the feminine, has been used for hundreds of years in healing ceremonies. Also in burial ceremonies, by the way. James asks if Mary is here, and in the very next scene, he believes that he sees her. When James first sees Maria, he calls her Mary. He cannot believe how much she looks like his wife. My name is Maria. James is both projecting his desire with Maria, as well as Maria is directly addressing the guilt James is experiencing. Maria is an amalgam of Mary and the anima, which is every man's own unconscious creation of the feminine. An amalgam is just a combination. But the unconscious can combine things such as our dreams and intuitions, and it can form things in ways that are just completely mysterious to the conscious mind. So let's talk about the anima, and this is explained, this is a term that Jung uncovered in his occult studies, that this concept is very old. It's thousands upon thousands of years old. This is something Jung brought from his occult studies into modern psychology, and it fits perfectly because the knowledge of human beings and knowledge of self isn't anything new, at least to seekers and to mystics and to teachers of the wisdom traditions, right? All of this occult knowledge is just ancient psychology. So this is a quote, this is an excerpt from Carl Jung's writings. The projection forming factor is called the anima. Wherever she appears in dreams, fantasies, or visions, she appears personified, thereby demonstrating that basically she possesses all the outstanding characteristics of a female person. Right? So this is Maria. She's the anima. She's the feminine. She's the internal masculine's feminine energy. Right? She is not the invention of the conscious, right? But a spontaneous production of the unconscious. Neither is she a substitute figure for the mother. Maria has nothing to do with James' mother, right? Mary might have a little bit to do with it, but that concept really isn't explored so much in Silent Hill 2. On the contrary, there is every likelihood that those numinous or mysterious attributes which make the mother imago so dangerously powerful derive from the collective archetype, the anima, which is incarnated anew in every male child. Right? So this is to say the mother archetype, or the image of the mother, comes from the inner feminine energy of the masculine. We have our own, as every man has an unconscious projection of this feminine energy, but we have our own feminine energy. Every man, right? You may not want to acknowledge it, but you have a degree and amount of feminine energy. And if you don't cultivate that, if you don't cultivate the nurturer in your heart, and for a lot of men, it may not be possible unless they have a nurturer, unless they have not a mother, but they have the love of the feminine heart in a partner, for example. And this could be for men or women. But having that and cultivating that, the nurturer in the man, and of course, conversely in the feminine, if the feminine is nurturing her masculine heart within herself, then there's harmony and balance within the energies, because everyone has the masculine and feminine energies within themselves. This is a wonderful image. This is you could call this the alchemical wedding. This is the harmony between, this is inside the self here. This is the self represented inside of the circle, and this is the harmony of the masculine and feminine energies in the middle. Of course, they're coming together here. This is balance and harmony between the two. So Maria suggests to James that maybe he hated Mary. Again, there's another example of a character. This is the third character along the journey that James is being challenged by, directly challenged. The guilt that comes over James's face and his strong negative reaction cannot be denied in this scene. After all, why is James seeing Maria in front of him to begin with, right? It's not that James hated Mary. However, he is grappling with intense feelings of resentment and guilt. James processes his intense emotions with the help of the feminine. But he has to project this side outside of himself because he doesn't believe it's part of him, although it is, right? He has to integrate that within himself somehow. Will he do it by the end of the story? We'll find out. So James and Maria go to the bowling alley next. And Maria decides to wait outside, right? She hates bowling. As James enters the bowling alley, something very interesting occurs. The next cutscene is the only time in the entire game where James directly witnesses a dialogue between other characters besides himself. As James enters the bowling alley, he sees Eddie and Laura having a conversation, right? Eddie's talking about, he says, I ran away because I was scared. Nobody will ever forgive me. He's telling Laura about why he ran away. And the significance of this scene drives home the point that even within James' own unconscious, his inner child, which is Laura, is not enough to help Eddie climb out of his pit of despair. Eddie doesn't believe he is worth anything. And Laura appears that she may be persuaded to believe Eddie's loathsome opinion of himself as well, right? This is Eddie's in a very bad state here. As Eddie talks about why he ran away, Laura asks him a very insightful question. She asks him, but if you did something bad, why don't you just say you were sorry? Right? This question is meant to teach the audience, as its true meaning is completely lost on Eddie. Right? Eddie is not ready to see this. We can see that Eddie couldn't say he was sorry, because that would mean he had to believe himself to be worthy of forgiveness in the first place. And of course, Eddie doesn't see himself as worthy of anything at all. So much so that Laura begins to openly insult Eddie, right? She calls Eddie a gutless fatso. Because if Eddie doesn't respect himself, then no one's going to no one's going to respect Eddie, right? And of course, what does Eddie do after Laura says this to him? He just keeps eating his pizza. This is a quote from Alain de Botton. He has this guy Alain de Botton is a philosopher, and he has a YouTube channel called School of Life. Very practical, wonderful information. This guy's amazing. This is a great quote. To one's enemies, I hate myself more than you ever could. And this is Eddie, right? Unfortunately. Laura manages to slip away as James approaches. The fact that James is still pursuing Laura indicates that he is still on his quest for resolution, right? Whereas Eddie, on the other hand, has completely given up on this idea that he has any value to offer anyone, much less to himself, right? And so James approaches Eddie and he says, Eddie, let's go after her. And what does Eddie say? He says, Laura, but why? She said a gutless fatso like me would just slow her down, right? Or a fatso like me would just slow her down. These two opposing sides within James will eventually confront each other, right? Because after all, Eddie is another aspect of the unconscious of James Sunderland, right? So, although his conscious mind may not have made this connection, in a deeper sense, every character in Silent Hill has the potential to become a monster. Every single character, including Eddie, including James. Even further, it is James who does, in a way, contribute to bringing forth the monster within Eddie. He kind of has to, though, right? Because he has to lay this monster within himself. He has to reject it. He has to put it down, right? He has to realize something about himself that he and Eddie share, and then he has to reject that. After all, we see James sowing the seeds of apathy with Eddie, right? That he will, of course, later reap in this story. Because James has every opportunity to sit down next to Eddie and say, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? Right? I believe in you. He has a chance to do this. Why doesn't he do this? Well, because James doesn't realize that he and Eddie are the same, right? They're going through the same experiences in life, and James is on his own. He's on his own mission he's on his own delusional quest of chasing ghosts, right? So they're both going through their own things here. This is a quote from Sigmund Freud. We are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love. Right? So James has an opportunity to love Eddie here and say, hey, it's going to be okay. I believe in you. Come with me. But he doesn't do that. Nor should he, unfortunately, because he needs to confront this side of himself. And James isn't ready to sit down next to Eddie anyway and say those kind of things and say, hey, man, I believe in you. He's not ready to do that within himself because James has his own reconciliation to do. So as James gives chase to Laura, he comes to a small space between two buildings where she has presumably escaped. Right? So this puts the pursuit of Laura on hold, as it were. He's still pursuing Laura, but things slow down a bit here. So Maria shows James another way through, which just happens to be the place where the divine feminine is most celebrated by the masculine. Can you guess where that is? After all, it is the feminine which helps guide the masculine sense of purpose and direction in the first place. This is a concept of, the way I understand it, is dancing, right? If a man and a woman are dancing, typically the man is the lead, the woman's the follow. However, a lead, the man, cannot truly lead the dance unless he's picking up on the subtle cues from the female, from the follow. So actually it is the follow that leads the dance in her own feminine aspect, and it's the masculine that also leads the dance in his own. But the feminine follows, but also the masculine follows. So there's a very interesting type of dynamic, energy dynamic between men and women when things are gelling, right? When they say, that's the very phrase, things just gel, things just click, right? It's that harmony that you're experiencing in a relationship, right? Think of so this is a way to think of it as well, as think of the feminine energy in a relationship as a river, right? Because women are dynamic. They're the cosmic expression of sex, right? Of everythingness of, And so think of the feminine energy as a flowing river with constant variations. Things are always changing. There's waves, ripples, stillness. And the masculine is a swimmer in the river, right? The swimmer must use the current in order to navigate, in order to get anywhere, in order to do anything. You don't want to swim against the current, right? You'll drown, right? That analogy to me, there's also a lot of truth in that a woman could emotionally reduce a man to just a smoking, just rubble, to a nub. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. So James is asking her, is there another way? And she says, yeah, right through here. James and Maria are about to enter Heaven's Night Bar from the alley, of which only Maria has the key to. Maria represents that side of Mary that James wishes he could have had or missed out on. Maria's sensuality, her playful nature, and the way she is tuned into James are some things that he is trying to reconcile in his search for his deceased wife. James is being invited into an aspect of the feminine heart by this gesture from Maria. She's showing James that she trusts him. Maria is showing James that trust is something that he must honor in her and ultimately in himself. Of course, we know Maria is kind of a character that's maybe a little bit looser with her affections, right? But this is what James desires. He desires that closeness, that intimate relationship, and also that freedom, right, with a significant partner, right? With a significant other.